All right. So I want to go through a little bit of a history of that ecosystem. How did we go from nothing to $70 billion a day being traded in derivatives? So let's look at the exchanges. The exchanges are, at this point, the main place where you would use Bitcoin. You wouldn't use them on Silk Road anymore because, well, that site is shut down and the owner is in prison. But you might use them for a few illicit type of activities. But by and large, the main use of those cryptocurrencies today is speculative investment. Therefore, exchanges. So if we go back to 2010, 2011, what we had at that time were primarily, and I would say almost exclusively, what are called spot exchanges. Essentially, they're places where you show up with a dollar bill and you get Bitcoin in exchange, and vice versa. You're not buying any fancy product, you are buying the actual currency. The exchange may decide to hold the Bitcoin for you. They may be custodial, or they may just tell you, hey, you can withdraw it, and then you bring it back to your laptop. So perhaps the most infamous of those exchanges was Mt. Gox, which got broken into not once, but twice. This is the second time. The first time they lost, I think, something like $30 million, but no one really cared because that was their money. The second time they lost more than that because Bitcoin had significantly appreciated and they basically lost all of their customers' money. To the point that you saw people like this gentleman who was doing kind of a silent protest in front of the Mt. Gox offices in Japan. That exchange was not fraudulent, not outright fraudulent, although the person ended up in prison, but it's not clear that it was for negligence or actual malice. Yes, what they were doing was kind of illegal, but it's not clear that there was real malice behind this, unless you characterize malice as writing really, really, really crappy PHP code, which they were totally guilty of. They had a very creative accounting system. Once again, never attribute to malice what can be explained by sheer incompetence, but that was really bad. In fact, an insider siphoned off a couple of their databases and posted them, right? So they dumped like Postgres or MySQL, I forgot, databases. And a few of us, people at San Diego, people here, we started to analyze them and we realized there's a bunch of tables that are missing. And yeah, they were missing. They weren't missing from the dump, they were missing from the database. So yeah, that was not very properly managed. So Mt. Gox was probably the most famous one, but there were others. There was an exchange, I think Bitcoinica, mentioned here, that was relying on Linode for their infrastructure, and they basically did not do due diligence with their Linode credentials. People noticed that, just took some money and ran. Bitpro, the number 4 Bitcoin-based exchange, shut down for good after losing all of their money to hackers. The list goes on, right? The largest Bitcoin exchange in Brazil gets hacked. I think it was Mercado Bitcoin. Yeah, Mercado Bitcoin. Again, they lost pretty much all of their money, and they sent an email to people saying, sorry, we lost the money. And part of the problem with those cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin being prominent among them, is that transactions are one way. They cannot be reversed, right? So if Michael does not secure his private key, and I find a way of, getting access to that private key, your Bitcoins are mine, and they're gone. They will not come back. You cannot call up the bank and say, hey, somebody stole money. Please revert the transaction. It doesn't work. So a lot of those exploits, a lot of those activities ended up being very lucrative for a bunch of individuals that were engaged in them and who basically didn't have much to fear in terms of prosecution or repercussions. So if you combine the fact that Bitcoin started to be worth quite a bit of money, with people who are essentially running financial institutions, but with zero knowledge about computer security for the most part. And you combine that with people who are like, yeah, let's develop something really, really fast because we want to make money. You end up with total fly-by-night operations of literally, a guy and his dog running this out of a basement and transferring millions of dollars. So I let you read this. Unfortunately, I have very bad news. I cannot currently process your withdrawals. Yeah, I mean, you can stop here. That means that the guy's machine got hacked and he doesn't have the money anymore. The situation is very complicated. Transaction, I don't understand what happened. And it's all my fault. Well, yeah, you're the only person to have the keys. That's why I feel terrible about it. Thank you. That's going to help me, pay my mortgage now that this money is gone. I tried to make this up. I think it means I tried to make up for this, but to keep the site afloat and somehow recover the funds, well, it's not possible anymore. Transactions are one way. Right now, there's close to 2,000 Bitcoin pending withdrawal, which I can't honor because people knew that there was a problem with the exchange, get their Bitcoin back. Guess what? They're gone. They can't. Other fly-by-night operations, a couple of people told me that the owner was a scammer, so it would kind of make sense that the money is gone. I really hope not, but it would make a lot of sense if it did. We saw also a lot of that stuff, right? People running operations very, very poorly and just disappearing with the money, sometimes because it was stolen, sometimes because they stole it themselves. Cryptopia was an interesting example. What they did was to essentially, when they got broken into, they managed to stop the breach before the whole money was siphoned off. And then they socialized losses, meaning that if your wallet was not affected, but still it was, because you're now going to contribute to a tax fund to make sure that losses are not disproportionately borne by the unlucky investors whose wallets got pilfered. Any Canadians in the audience? Somebody from Canada? Yes, one person. I hope you didn't have any money on Quadriga CX. That was the largest Canadian exchange. That's the thing that everybody went to. And it turns out that, once again, this is an exchange where money just disappeared. The owner and operator of the exchange passed away and apparently was the only person to hold the private keys, except that subsequent forensic analysis showed that, yes, possibly they were the only person to hold the private keys, but those private keys contained absolutely no money in them, presumably because he had spent it all on other pursuits. Bitfinex is a super dodgy exchange that got hacked. Recently, people got arrested for being the masterminds behind this, which I don't believe it to be true for a second. I think that they were arrested because they were very, very nice and very stupid mules that were, hired to move money back and forth. This is still, like, we're learning more and more about what happened there. Bitfinex is still around. They are, in fact, the Tether cryptocurrency that you might have heard of started from there. All right, so all of this was historical. It's not research. What about research? Well, so there is this timeline of events with, lots of Bitcoin being stolen. Those numbers are pretty high. If you convert them to fiat, they are also very, very high. And so back in 2012, we thought, well, can we just run a simple regression to see what are the factors that are going to predict whether an exchange is going to be broken or not? And so at the time, we could manually go and capture information about all exchanges. This is a super, super simple paper. It's a 5-page paper. It's like literally my friend and I running one regression to see if we could say something intelligent about it. And what we discovered is that between 2010 and 2012, there were 40 Bitcoin currency exchanges that opened and publicly announced their existence. 18 of those closed. That's a 45% failure rate with a median lifetime of slightly more than a year. And 45% of those 45% that closed did not reimburse customers at all. So a quarter, give or take, of all exchanges left and absconded with the money. 9 exchanges were actually breached. 5 of them ended up closing permanently. Mt. Gox was one of those that were breached, not closed at the time of the study. Mt. Gox was still around. We were aghast, but yeah, it was still around. This all predated the Mt. Gox. All right, so what factors affect when an exchange closes? How do you impact the lifetime of an exchange? We hypothesized that there were 3 variables that matter. The daily transaction volume. Presumably, the bigger, the more robust, they've got money, they can pay security consultants, they might be able to do something. We thought that experiencing security breaches in the past was an indicator of very poor security hygiene, and that people being people, they may not learn enough in time and continue, cutting corners and being broken into again. And we also thought that anti-money laundering compliance might have some sort of correlation as to whether an exchange was broken into or not. A lot of those exchanges claim to be in jurisdictions that did not do any anti-money laundering compliance, meaning if you want to buy drugs, come get money here, we'll help you fund your transfers. Lifetimes are censored because, well, we stopped in 2012, and that's not the end of time, right? Some exchanges were still going and so forth. We built what's called a Cox proportional hazards model. Basically, the idea is to have a bunch of coefficients that are exponential whose exponential tells you something about the increased or decreased probability. So the first thing is that anti-money laundering compliance or not did not affect anything at all. It's apples and oranges. Daily volumes did in fact correlate with exchanges living longer, and indeed the probability that an exchange had been broken before was a good indicator that the exchange was going to be broken into again. So from these early years, we learned that those exchanges posed significant risks to customers. Half of the exchanges were broken into. We found that, well, what I just said, right? Transaction volume was positively correlated with experiencing a breach. I'm sorry, I completely misspoke here earlier. The more volume you have, the more likely you were to experience a breach because the bigger the target on your back. So initially, people would invest more in security, but not so much that they would escape. And being broken into before meant also that you would be broken into again. What I didn't show you on that slide is that the total volume positively correlated with the length the exchange was going to be active. So they have a lot of money, they've got a significant runway, they get broken into, but they continue, they keep going. And then they get broken into again, and then finally they die. So this was 2012. In 2015, one of my students said, this paper is not good because this was the early days, I want to redo it. I told him, okay, just redo it. And he did. He spent a lot of time manually poring over the data, and he realized that it got even worse. It became, marginally worse, but it was still more or less half of the exchanges were broken into. So you may wonder, what about today? We've got very big exchanges that are very famous, CanBX, FTX, Kraken, and others. Those don't get broken into. Those are billion-dollar businesses, they know what they're doing. If you go to other jurisdictions with more local places, I don't think that the situation is any better. We have run a regression and we showed a new effect, which is that exchanges that supported two-factor authentication was a lot less likely to be broken into. Again, it's a correlation, but this one actually makes sense. There's no causation here at all. But there's a correlation that does make sense because if you support UFA, that means that you've at least gotten somebody, some girl or some guy on your team that knows a little bit about authentication enough to say, hey, we want UFA, and they probably know also about, authentication tokens and all of that good stuff. So maybe one of your employees took a security class at some point, which is a marked improvement compared to the baseline. All right, so again, we are looking at the first half of the 2010s, and this is more or less the state of the Bitcoin exchanges at the time. You know, the bank in the far west that basically is where people go get money legally or illegally. More modern exchanges certainly must be much more reliable. Nowadays, they look more like that. And that's true, but there are many other risks for people to lose their money with cryptocurrencies. So in the early days, if you wanted to lose your money with Bitcoin, either you went to the Bitcoin forum and you gave money to any random idiot that guaranteed 6% a day returns. There were people like that. They are not on the Bitcoin forum anymore. They are spending time in federal prison. Those are called Ponzi schemes. 6% a day, no. 1% a day, no. I mean, just run the APY and you'll see that it does not compute. But other than that, if you wanted to lose your money, it was mostly because you would buy stuff from an exchange and the exchange would go under. So is outright theft the only way that an exchange could pose a risk to users? The answer is no. So that brings us to the early 2020s. There are many different ways for you to lose your shirt. All right, so early derivatives and margin trading. What is that? Well, people realize that when you go to an exchange and you buy a Bitcoin, that's nice, but you're kind of forced to quote unquote go long, meaning you're making a bet that the value of that Bitcoin is going to appreciate, right? You go to the bank to buy an asset thinking that maybe it's going to appreciate. Much like when you go to, you know, a brokerage house, you buy some Apple stock or some Tesla stock or whatever, because you think that this thing is going to appreciate in the future, right? It's an investment. You're bidding on the commodity that you're buying or on the stock that you're buying. But what if you don't believe that to be the case? What if you want to bid against the value of Bitcoin? You think this thing is a scam and that the value is going to crater at some point. It wasn't easy to do. You can't do that easily on a regular spot market exchange. So specifically, if you want to quote unquote go short, what you do in traditional markets is that you borrow a Bitcoin from somebody else, and you will buy it back from them once the value has plummeted. That's how you make money. There was no way of shorting Bitcoins until 2011-ish. I think MPEX was the first, and ICBit were the first to offer these kind of things, but it didn't really work. The one that really made a large imprint on this was BitMEX, and we'll see why in a second. But margin trading also started to be offered. So what's margin trading? It's a way of using multipliers, and I'll get back to that in a second. But let's say that you're really bullish on Bitcoin, but you have no money, or almost no money. You can say, well, you know, I go all in. I put my $5 on the table, and I want to have like 100x leverage, which means that I'm going to make $500 if I'm right. But it also means that if the value depreciates by 1%, I lose everything, right? So an example is coming. So BitMEX was the place that really kind of coalesced all of that and really made it an attractive product to the masses. From 2014 to about 2018, I think, I have a graph about that in a few minutes, BitMEX really didn't do much, but when the bull market ended and people realized that the value was decreasing, they flocked to BitMEX's gates because they were like, hey, we can short on this exchange. Nowadays, you get things like Bitfinex. Yeah, the people who got hacked, who are really dodgy, who started those, you know, very questionable currencies, they're still around. We still don't know where they're incorporated. It's extremely shady. You've got also, you know, respectable exchanges like Kraken that have perpetual futures. So all of those, OKEx perpetual futures, Deribit, and so forth, those are not spot markets. Kraken also has a spot exchange. But those are places where you buy contracts on the future value of a cryptocurrency asset. So let's do a deep dive in BitMEX. First, I'm going to introduce what the platform looked like in 2020. It's more or less shut down nowadays, but it's a good exemplary of what you see in that ecosystem. Then I discuss what the contracts are, and then I present some observations about the ecosystem. So if you want to go to BitMEX, or if you wanted to go to BitMEX, the first thing that you needed to do was to not be an American, because US people well, an American, legally speaking. So I think this includes, unfortunately for you, all of the students in this room, because you are in this country. So you're US people, you pay taxes here.
No,
bottom line,
I have a Bachelor of Commerce degree.
I'm sorry? Okay. I'm not exactly sure what this was. So the point is that BitMEX was not open to US people.
Oh,
that includes US citizens.
Actually, attending. Oops, sorry.
Somebody needs to mute.
Yeah, can you just?
The host is.
Yeah, I'm the host. Yeah, I'll just.
Little participant.
Oh, he muted himself.
Okay. Well.
So.
All right. And there's something in the chat that I can't read. All right. It's you. All right. So, how did it test whether you were a US person or not? Did they ask for your passport? Did they ask for a driver's license? Did they ask for proof of citizenship of another country? Maybe a lease on a house? Mortgage documents? No. You were using an IP address. So if you're 128.2. whatever, you're coming from Carnegie Mellon, boo, you're from Pennsylvania, we don't like you. If it so happens that you have a linode in Singapore, in the UK, in France, anywhere else, and you connect to BitMEX, welcome. You're one of us now. So there was basically zero control other than by IP address, which is one of the reasons, by the way, the SEC was not too happy about this. The founders of BitMEX is facing jail time. They pleaded guilty, and they're probably going to jail because there was essentially no know your customer type of enforcement. So how do you create an account in BitMEX? You need an IP address that is not in the US. What is the other piece of legalese that you need? An email address. It's very, very hard to procure one, I think. So if Bob has 2 email addresses that he wants to use, he can get 2 different BitMEX accounts. Those are Bitcoin addresses. This, as you will see, they start with 3 BMX. That's how we kind of figured out that those were BitMEX addresses, because they are what's called vanity addresses. Long story short, you can get addresses that start like that. You just have to expend a little bit of computational power. But all of BitMEX addresses started with BMEX. There were some non-BitMEX addresses that started with BMEX, and they stick out like a sore thumb when you look at the blockchain, because you see that they have nothing to do with those. They don't transact at all with other BMEX addresses. So we were able to basically re-identify everything that was in BitMEX. So essentially, all of those are entrance points to BitMEX. BitMEX does not hold any US dollars. They only use Bitcoin as an internal currency. And then you have contracts that are being traded, and all of those are running on a matching engine, which is essentially a glorified Postgres database running internally. None of that goes on the blockchain, right? You're sending money to BitMEX. BitMEX keeps that money and puts an entry in a gigantic spreadsheet that says, Mayank has 10 Bitcoins on BitMEX and now can buy contracts here and there. So people trade those contracts, and the contracts are seeded with real-time price data. I'll get back to that in a second. And then only when you want to cash out, then stuff goes on the blockchain again, right? So you put money in a giant pool. You do whatever you want in that pool that will never appear on the blockchain. And when you cash out, you get money back from the pool. It may come from a completely different address, because BitMEX will say, hey, Michael wants to withdraw 5 Bitcoins. Okay, the initial address that you used has been depleted because it was used to pay somebody else. We'll use what used to be Mayank's wallet. It doesn't really matter. The interface still says you have 10 Bitcoin, Mayank still has 5 Bitcoins, and that's all fine. So the point is that internally you cannot do like blockchain forensics, because it's all in a database that's hosted locally. All right, so what are those contracts? In traditional finance, you typically have contracts that are options or future options, and basically they have an expiry date. So we are betting on something, and then at some point in the future, that contract is going to end, and people are going to take home some money or not. BitMEX pioneered something called the perpetual future swap. It's basically a contract without an expiry date. And a single unit of those contracts corresponds to $1 worth of Bitcoin. And BitMEX is matching people who want to go long with people who want to go short. The idea is that half of the network in volume is betting that the Bitcoin price is going to appreciate. The other half in volume is betting that the Bitcoin price is going to depreciate. We can match those people. So essentially, Alice is betting against Bob. Bob is betting against Alice. So what they do is that they agree to trade a contract with a value defined to be $1 worth of BTC. So if the Bitcoin is $10,000, that contract currently is worth 0.0001 Bitcoins, right? It's held constant in US dollars. The long payoff, so Alice's payoff, is the initial contract value minus the final contract value. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but again, that's because the contract is constant in dollars. So if the value of Bitcoin raises, right, the final contract is going to be less in Bitcoin than the initial contract. $1 will get you a lot less. Alice makes money. Bob, it's the exact opposite. It's the final contract minus the initial contract. That's the short side. It's a zero-sum game, right? If Alice makes money, Bob loses money. Bob makes money, Alice loses money. So for instance, let's assume that Bitcoin went from 10,000 to 100,000. So 0.001 BTC was the initial value of that contract in Bitcoin. At the end, it's 0.00001 Bitcoin. The long payoff is 9,000 Satoshis. Satoshi is 10 to the minus 8 Bitcoins, and the short payoff is minus 9,000 cents. All right, all good. So far, so good. What about leverage? Alice only has 0.1 Bitcoin. Bob has 5 Bitcoins. And Alice wants to bet against Bob. So the problem is Alice does not have enough money, but there's a way around that, which is that Alice can use what's called leverage. Those of you who have background in finance, you see those numbers and you're probably like, oh my God, 50x, I'm crazy or what? No, they're not. I mean, some other platforms were doing 125. So, 50 was still very reasonable. I'm joking here, but in traditional financial markets, when you get leverages in the order of 10x or 20x, that's for like people who are completely crazy. In Bitcoin, no problem. 50x, yeah, sure, you can do it. And we'll see that it leads to some really bad outcomes in some cases, if I have time. So Alice is 50x leverage long. Similarly here, Bob is 1x leverage short. What does that mean? Well, let's say that our contract starts at $10,000 per Bitcoin. Now it goes up to 12.5K per Bitcoin. Alice is really in good shape, right? She's 50x leverage, which means that her gains have been multiplied. In that specific instance, she started with 0.1 Bitcoin, and she basically made 1 Bitcoin in the whole trade. So now she holds about 1.1 Bitcoins. Why? Because the 50,000 contracts, which were initially worth 5 Bitcoins, sorry, the 50,000 contracts were initially worth 5 Bitcoins, right? Contract is $1. Now they're worth 4 Bitcoins. So Alice made 1 Bitcoin. Long payoff minus initial payoff minus final payoff is the long payoff. Made 1 Bitcoin. Bob lost 1 Bitcoin. It's okay. He has plenty of Bitcoins. So he's okay. Essentially, Bob's, by the way, exposure is constant to the US dollar. Alice's is not. But Bob's exposure is constant in US dollar. All right, but what happens if, so Alice is happy, she's perhaps borrowing from her equity line and going to party in the Caribbean. And then she gets a call from her broker, or more likely she gets an email from BitMEX saying, you got wrecked. Because what happened? Well, during that night of partying, Bitcoin plummeted from $9,500 to perhaps $9,804 US dollars. That's not a big decrease, right? I mean, we are talking about something like 2%, right? Well, in that specific case, the value of those contracts now, which was 5 Bitcoins originally, is now worth 5.1 Bitcoins. Which means that Alice, who had put 0.1 on the table, has been taken out to the cleaners. She does not have any money to afford anything if the value decreases more. She gets liquidated. Typically, she gets liquidated a little bit before that. I mean, I'm shoving under the rug here all of the transaction fees and like the things that exchanges do to be profitable. But basically, as soon as she gets within epsilon of that limit, her account is closed. What that means is that the contract is terminated. She can't go back. She can say, no, wait, I'm sure it's gonna go back up tomorrow. No, your money is taken, it's given to Bob. Bob can do whatever he wants with it, but it's done. And this is for roughly 2%, right? Well, she was using 50x leverage. First order approximation, yeah, 50x times 2, that's 100%, she's done. So Bob's contracts are also closed, right, when this happens. Perhaps it would have been a good idea for Alice to close at that point, but she decided not to, and now she lost everything very, very quickly. So one thing that I didn't say is that I kind of simplified things. I assumed that there was one Alice and one Bob. In general, there are many Alices that are bidding against many Bobs, right? So your 50,000 contracts here that Alice is interested in purchasing, maybe she buys 40,000 from one person, 85 from somebody else. And all of that is handled through a traditional order book. So, people are like, I want to buy that much, I want to go short that much, and so forth. All right, so we looked at that market and we combined 3 different sources of information. One was the Bitcoin blockchain, which was really useful for us to see what was coming in the market, what was coming out of the market, and then to play a little bit of clustering analysis to figure out, yeah, those accounts, they are probably the same person. The Trollbox. The Trollbox is a Twitter-like or Slack-like communication channel that existed in BitMEX. It was embedded in the website. It was extremely active. There were bots on this thing that, notably the infamous Wrecked bot, that basically was making fun of people who just got auto-deleveraged. Well, it's really funny, right? I mean, this person lost their life savings. It's funny because, well, I mean, but the point is that there were a lot of data on that Trollbox, including people posting their positions. Look at me, I'm long with like 10,000 contracts. Okay, as somebody who was born close to the Swiss border, I'm like, why do you reveal your financial positions to anybody? But people were doing that. So we analyzed that. That actually didn't go very far. But here are some of the main findings from that study. So this is, for all of you students, never do that. That's a 2-axis graph. I hate them. We use this one because, well, it was a moment of weakness when I was talking with my students. But in green and red is the value of Bitcoin in US dollar. That's going to be your right axis. The left axis denotes the number of accounts on BitMEX cumulatively, and red is kind of the derivative. It's the new accounts that were added. And as you can see, there's basically nothing going on until the value of Bitcoin plummets in early 2019. That's when Bitcoin went up to 15,000 and within like a couple of months went down to like 7,000, right? People were like, oh, party is over. I like making money. How can I make more money? Maybe I can bid against the Bitcoin. Okay, well, BitMEX will take your money and you can try to be short. And some other folks were like, no, I want to stay long. So you would have no problem finding people who would want to bid with you or against you. So what we saw is that activity went pretty high during the bear market. When the bull market came back in late 2019, early 2020, nothing really bad happened. And then you might think, oh, the super bullish market of 2021, that sunk BitMEX. No, this is when we're saying correlation does not imply causation. What sunk BitMEX here? Does anybody know? I've got 3 letters for you. SEC, the Security Exchange Commission. Does not look good on an exchange when the exchange itself is indicted, right? So the US Security Exchange Commission in November of 2020, as we finished just writing that paper, they decided to issue a criminal complaint against BitMEX for, I forgot what the specific accusations were, but they all revolved around, you guys don't do any KYC AML. You are basically a money laundering machine for all sorts of horrible people. They were not, they're a casino, but that's also illegal. So trading activity, what you see here is a graph of the trading instruments. So again, BitMEX started here, right? 2014, for like 2 or 3 years, they did nothing. And then what happened is that a lot of contracts started to be traded. As you can see, the main one is the green one. This is a stacked plot, but the green one is the biggest one, and that's perpetual Bitcoin futures. Bitcoin is king. The blue ones would be Ethereum futures. So as you can see, also Ethereum as kind of the second largest cryptocurrency is getting popular. Settled Bitcoin futures would be more like traditional options. They have like an expiry date. They never really got very popular. Customer deposits. This is interesting. So again, it's a 2-axis graph. And the reason why it's a 2-axis graph is that we want to see what's happening when the Bitcoin price changes. And so what we have here again is a stacked plot. In green is the proportion of people who have less than 1 Bitcoin worth of money on BitMEX. In yellow, the people who have between 1 and 10 Bitcoin. So, you know, small investors, not so small investors, start to be pretty big investors, 100 Bitcoin, and people who have more than 100 Bitcoins, right? And what you see initially is that there's a relatively uniform distribution across all tiers of wealth. And this continues until there's a big sell-off in November of 2018, right here. And what happens? Well, some people made money and some people lost money. A lot of low-tier people, especially the yellow, so the less than 10 Bitcoin, and the green, were going long, perhaps with leverage, because they were like, you know, it's prime to make a comeback, right? I mean, look, it's almost not decreasing anymore. Whereas the hedge fund managers were like, we have some Bitcoin in custody, like we actually hold Bitcoins on spot markets. Maybe we should go short on that platform. Oh, and those guys want to go leverage? Yeah, go nuts. Here's the result. So that was number one. Then there was another event where Bitcoin dropped significantly, and that again consolidated a bunch of pretty large investors into gigantic investors. Those guys, essentially, the purple guys, got bought off by the red guys. And by the time, so this is basically when we should stop the measurements, because that's when there's the Department of Justice and the SEC indictments. At that point, BitMEX is like, I mean, people are running for the exit. But as you can see, I mean, stuff had been really rearranged. The rich people got richer. Another way of looking at this is with a heat map. And the x-axis is the date. The y-axis are various tiers of Bitcoin balance. And the shade is essentially the proportion of those accounts. And the reason why I like this plot is that you see initially it's the same as the previous one, just expressed differently. You see a fairly broad distribution, right? It's somewhat uniformly distributed. And then you see the money moving from the small account. You see, it's wonderful. It's like a balloon. It's going up. Money is going from the little guys to the big guys. So there is clear evidence that on BitMEX, at least, we are currently looking at other exchanges to see if that's still the case, but it looks like the little guys are always losing. And part of the reason why is that they can't really win. The big guys have tons of money. They can always continue playing. The little guys don't. They get cleaned up and cleaned out, and then they can't play anymore. So we used also clustering analysis to find that the large traders were using multiple accounts, which makes sense. I'm going to skip over this because that was less interesting. The troll box was more prolific than Reddit in 2018, 2020. This is just to give you an insight as to what the data was. But what I really wanted to show was this plot. And I should have arranged it in the opposite direction, because the important part, the interesting part, is the green line. So it's stacked. And you see that green does vary, but so this is the amount of traffic at all times of the day. Orange is English. It's remaining relatively constant-ish, which makes sense because, well, it's at this point an international language, so people speak English in pretty much any time zone. But what about the green one, which is also, there's a small time of the day effect, a very minimal one. I mean, it looks like those people are trading perhaps not 24/7, but 22 out of 24, right? What's green? It's Korean. Why is it interesting? It's interesting because 95% of the Korean speakers live in Korean Standard Time. That's one time zone. So we should be able to see some time of the day effect. We don't at all. What does that tell us? It tells us that those people trade all the time. This is not good. And there's nothing particular about Korean people other than the fact that they're in one time zone. I'm pretty sure that if we were able to see, isolate the US time zone somehow, we probably would see exactly the same behavior from American investors. Oh, wait, no, you can be an American investor. Yeah, come on. I mean, everybody's using a VPN. So this was alarming to us that there's no marked time of the day effect, because that really means that people are trading all the time. You may think, well, what about the Korean diaspora? Yes, but still, that should not account for as uniform a distribution as this. All right, so this I'm gonna skip. I want to introduce this briefly. Small positions comprise the majority of liquidation volume. So another thing to keep in mind, small people lose money disproportionately. The liquidation events, the you're done type of events, more than half of them are for fairly small positions. Fairly small, I mean, as in less than $2 million. Okay, I don't have, I have until one, right? I mean, we just want to have questions after that. Yeah, I'm not going to prolong this more. I got a few more things that are interesting, but I want to introduce this. It's kind of an example of the real dangers to the underlying markets of letting those derivatives go wild. So you may think so far, okay, yeah, people want to go trade, they go into this thing that is basically a glorified casino. Fine, they want to be stupid, they lose all of their money. I'm a cynic. I'm like, slightly libertarian, slightly cynic. I'm like, yeah, if people want to commit financial suicide, let them, right? Okay, that's a very, very cold view of things. But honestly, that may be, not enough to actually push the regulators to do something. People do stupid things. But what if I told you that sometimes those events do, and more frequently than you might think, have an impact on the actual spot price of those cryptocurrencies? How can that be possible? Well, let's look at an example in 2018. A trader on OKEx, one of those very, very reputable exchanges, initiated a $416 million long position. That's a lot of money. Did that person have that money? No. They had some money. They had $21 million that they wanted to play with. And they put a 20x leverage on it. So 21 times 20, yeah, that's 420. It was not 21 million, it was 20 point something, right? So they were like, yeah, we're going to go long at a strike price of 8,442, which was, close to the value at that time. So 20x leverage with $20 million. So that's a large position in the end, right? It's a $400 million bet. according to the rules of the position, if the total value of the position drops below 395 million, the entire position should be sold, right? Why 395? 416 minus 21. Right, it loses $21 million in value. That means that at that point the person is liquidated. You're done. This would happen at a price of about $8,000 to the Bitcoin. Let's see what happened. The position was open here, 20x going long, and unfortunately the candle turns red. That Lamborghini is not gonna, I mean, it's gonna have to be sold. It's coming back up, it's coming back up. No, and oh, I've lost everything. Okay, fine. That person lost 20 million in a couple of hours. Yeah, literally 3 hours. What next? Well, there's a lot of Bitcoins that need to be sold, right? So they are liquidating the assets of that person. The exchange got back the contract, they are liquidating the assets, which means that they're selling Bitcoin. They're selling a lot of Bitcoin because that guy had $20 million worth of things. What does that mean? That means that sell. That's applying downward pressure to the spot price of Bitcoin, which means that between the time the liquidation starts and the liquidation ends, Bitcoin has lost a significant amount of value. Who is on the hook for that value? The guy who lost all of his money? No, he's done. It's the exchange. The exchange was trying to recoup that money by selling the assets. Except they can't. I mean, they sold too much. So, long story short, the exchange managed to lose $25 million worth of money. What did they do? They told everybody, well, we're gonna pass the hat around. Let's put some coins in it. And they actually made everybody take a haircut. So cryptocurrency trading is really not for the faint of heart. I would say it's probably not for the people who are not clinically insane. I'm joking here because I actually work with traders, but they are very, 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 individual traders that, stream stuff on Twitch. Those people might need help, actually. I'm not saying that ironically. Some of those people are displaying symptoms of gambling addiction. The people who are running hedge funds, that's a little bit different. But early spot exchanges were cesspool. Half of them failed. More modern exchanges are not cesspools, except they are because they give you plenty of tools to lose your money. We see an incredible concentration in wealth, right? It gets more and more and more concentrated. So the people who are good at this, yes, they do make a lot of money, but the people who are really, really good at this, that's maybe 0.001% of the people who enter the ecosystem. Yes, a guy like Sam Bankman-Fried, the guy who was running FTX, he was one of those early traders. He made a lot of money because he's very smart. He was very lucky also. But for one guy like that, there's thousands of people who lost their shirt in the market. Many retail traders appear to be time of day invariant. That's very worrisome. That means they're trading all the time. Again, displaying classic signs of addiction. And highly leveraged trading on margins can actually cause the house to lose. Casinos don't like to lose money. So what do? I'm sorry, I said casinos, I should have said Bitcoin exchanges. They don't like to lose money. So what they do is that they pass on the losses to their customers. So there's many different ways to lose your money with cryptocurrencies. With that, thank you. There are a couple of papers. If you want to play with the BitMEX data, we have a very, very nice interactive website that my former PhD student built. You can actually go and dissect the data, and if you find anything interesting in it, let us know. Pretty sure we've missed stuff. But yeah, there were a couple of papers on that, 2013, 2018, 2021, and we've got a couple more coming up because we managed to get a lot more exchange data in the past couple of years and found Well, a story for a different day, but let's put it that way. My respect for Twitter influencers, if it ever existed, has sunk to new lows. That's, advertisement for the next talk. With that, thank you very much. Michael.
Yeah, so, all of your studies, have you found evidence of market manipulation by large traders?
We've tried. We haven't been able to successfully say, yes, it is clear that this is manipulation. There are things that look weird, but that could be explained by idiocy, that could be explained by people taking outsized gambles. What we did see, and it's interesting because we were doing that at the same time of somebody, I think, commissioned by the SEC was doing exactly the same thing and filed a report with the SEC. This is not part of those, part of the research projects I introduced here, but for a while we were collecting all order books from all exchanges, spot exchanges. And we noticed pretty clear instances of wash trading. So the exchange basically trading with itself to give the appearance that they had a lot of volume. Financially, it's not market manipulation per se. It's just, false advertising, right? Look, we're trading billions of dollars every day. Well, no, you're trading $1 with yourself a billion times. So that we did see, and that was problematic.
So what I'm looking for is, let's say I'm a large trader.
Yeah.
You go long on me.
Yes.
I sell Bitcoin at a very low price
Yes.
to wipe you out.
Yes.
And then I have your money.
Yep. So that we definitely see. But is it manipulation? Not. I think manipulation is a little bit, it's a term that I want to be a little bit careful with, because when we say that, then immediately it's like, okay, you need to refer this to the SEC and, criminal charges and so forth. But that type of stuff, yes, we saw it. We saw people just, taking people to the cleaners, even for fun. They're like, we don't like this guy. He was mean. We can afford to lose 20 million. It's okay. We'll make them tomorrow just with, very stupid arbitrage things that are making 0.5% all the time. Successful traders, by the way, do that. It's a little bit like when you go play the roulette at the casino, they bid half of their money on black and half of their money on red. You're like, that's stupid. You would be losing money, right? Yes. In a casino, you would be losing money, but in practice, you're not. You might be able to exploit some inefficiencies. So those people don't want to make 300% in a day. They want to make 0.001%, no matter what the market does. It goes up, it goes down. I make my 0.001%. I'm happy I'm going to get my $2 million bonus at the end of it. But yeah, we saw some people taking positions just to clean people out.
Yeah, how much of the patterns that you're seeing, especially with money, like transferring from people with less wealth to people with more wealth,
Right,
are unique to these cryptocurrencies? And how much are those patterns similar now that we have things like Robinhood and?
Oh, I'm glad that you're asking a question about Robinhood. So I'd like to study this because I think it is very, very similar to the Robinhood type of ecosystem. Cryptocurrencies are just one asset. The reason why we're studying them is not because I'm super enamored with them, but because data is readily available and we can do a lot of things with it. Anecdotally, I see very similar behavioral patterns between the Robinhood type of investors and those guys, individual investors. So I would assume that the patterns look very, very, very similar. I don't have the data to back that up, but it's definitely something that I like to do. Yeah. How comparable does it look like compared to traditional finance? So Robinhood, just looking at derivative traders on the regular stock market, I think it looks a lot different because we don't have individual traders in like traditional markets. If you want to trade derivatives at any significant amount of volume on the stock market, you basically need, so Michael probably knows this a lot better than I do, but I think you need an accredited investor's license, which basically means you have $10 million in your bank account. That already rules out people who are not rich, right? Not everybody can become a hedge fund manager, and you need specific credentials for that. Not in cryptocurrencies. You can become a hedge fund manager tomorrow. Just remember what I told you. You just need an IP address that's not in the States.
So in the past, when I've taught some of this stuff, in my own classes, my students always ask me the same question, and I'm curious how you'll answer this.
You're outsourcing?
Well, I have an answer, I have my own answers, but and particularly since you mentioned this, when you talk about video games, when you talk
Yes.
about this
Yeah.
as something other than a Hayekian market,
Mhm.
right? These are I would say, I'll give you my answer, then I'll answer the question. These
Sure.
are stories that people are telling, these are adventures people are having. You ask, why would somebody publicize their own positions, publicly? This is a very un-Swiss thing to do. So let me ask you, why is Bitcoin worth anything? And this is a serious question. So
No,
the
so-
answer people give is because they'll pay for it. But
Exactly.
I want a deeper question. I want a deeper answer.
So it's well, you're not gonna get a deeper answer.
In that case, though, if that's the answer, then it is, the other phrase you used was, it's a Ponzi scheme.
No, not quite, because a Ponzi scheme is only sustainable if, there are new entrants that are paying for the established players, which is not necessarily the case here. Bitcoin mining is somewhat
Well,
of a Ponzi
that's-
scheme.
yeah.
The mining part is somewhat of a Ponzi scheme. You can't enter the market, it's too expensive at this point. Bitcoin itself is valuable, like you say, because people are ready to pay for it. And I think that part of the value of Bitcoin, so here I'm going to be less sarcastic about the cryptocurrency, and I'm going to try to paint some of the potentially desirable features. It is completely, or at least that was the design, decoupled from any national monetary policy. So it could have been used as, a hedge in times of trouble. People wanted to have like a digital equivalent to gold, for instance. Create something artificially scarce. People agree that it has some value. Gold doesn't have any value if you think about it. It's nice for ornaments, but it only gets value because it's scarce, right? So the idea was to create a digital analog of that. It's not really what ended up happening, right? I mean, the ecosystem evolved in ways like I just described. But I think that initially the idea was to have something that was decoupled, and decoupled is the right word, from a traditional financial system. Also, Bitcoin itself initially got some value because people viewed it as a way of entering transactions, digital transactions that were far more private than any of the other alternatives. Now, as a computer security person, that made me really, really scream when I saw this, because I was like, you've got a public ledger with public keys that is completely traceable. Somebody's going to come up with a company that traces that. Unfortunately, that wasn't me. That wasn't my friend Sarah either. My friend Sarah wrote the Bitcoin tracing paper, and then the Chinese people took that paper and made $1 billion business out of it. And she is still a poor professor at University College London. Well, they actually asked her if she wanted to join, and she said, no, I prefer to solve equations. But the point is that there is, I think, an increasing need for financial privacy. I'm kind of tired, and I don't think that I'm the only one, to have all of my credit card transactions, all of my transactions really be constantly tracked to advertise more and more crap to sell me. And so I think that people actually do have a desire for increased financial privacy. They don't want to lose convenience. The very simple answer to my conundrum is pay everything in cash. Have you tried to pay everything in cash? I tried to do that for a week. It's a nightmare. It's really a nightmare. People are like, oh no, why don't you use Venmo? Please, come on, at least something a little bit more privacy preserving that doesn't broadcast to the entire world what I'm spending. But to go back to what I was saying, I think that some of those cryptocurrencies, and in particular, and I'm going to say some swear words here, but Monero and Zcash, those really financially private currencies, they could serve a niche. Now, there's a double-edged sword. They can also be very well used for money laundering and for all sorts of things that we cannot, that we really don't want to see. So it's tricky, but when you're asking me, what's the value of a Bitcoin? I think that there is the promise that there is potentially an alternative to state-controlled money. Is it a good or a bad alternative? I don't know. It's an experiment. I would be on board to say it's an experiment worth pursuing. The experiment has been going on for 10 years. We see a lot of negatives, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the whole thing needs to be thrown out.
I mean, if I might just push back, right? So the two answers you gave were privacy and inflation hedge, and
Yes.
Bitcoin is neither. So why is it
Bitcoin
worth
is
it?
neither. That's true for privacy. It's terrible, but I don't think that. I think that without Bitcoin, you don't have Monero, you don't have Zcash, because they managed to show that those currencies could be. I mean, they being Satoshi Nakamoto and Russell Bricht and people who are now in prison, managed to show that those things could be used as a currency. That there was no like systemic barrier for those to be adopted. In fact, when people started to sell weed online, people were like, yeah, I'm gonna go get some Bitcoin. That was one of the reasons why
Absolutely. Yeah,
Bitcoin gained value. It wasn't backed by gold, it was backed by weed.
Yeah.
But it really was.
This is a longer conversation, so
Yeah, absolutely. Patrick.
So kind of tying into this question about the value of Bitcoin, there have been a couple of narratives around Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, right? The early adopters, those who were purchasing pizza with Bitcoin, those were the sort of early adopters.
Right.
The sort of libertarians who who wanted freedom from these monetary policies, right? So presumably those early adopters, if they still hold all those Bitcoin to this day, they should be in the more than 100, Bitcoin, wallets, right? So I'm wondering, as time goes by and other groups and demographics kind of join in, for example, the hedge funds, is there sort of a wealth transfer from the early libertarians to the hedge funds? So if that's the case, then probably the value of Bitcoin, one could argue, is not really living up to its initial ideals. So yeah, just wanted to get that question.
The answer to your question is I don't know, and that would be a fascinating study. There are several things that make it fairly hard to answer, but perhaps it's worth thinking about how to address that question. One problem with Bitcoin is its lack of usability. If you lose your private key, you've lost your coins, and no one will be able to tell the difference between that event and you simply hoarding them under your wallet, under your mattress. I lost 3 Bitcoins. People are like, oh my God, you lost so much money. Yeah, it was worth $30 at the time. I didn't really care, right? I mean, a Bitcoin was worth $10. I lost 3 of them because I sent them to a wallet whose private key I accidentally destroyed. There's, stories of these guys going on landfills with, metal detectors trying to find the hard drive of their old PC that they've thrown out, even though they had 500 Bitcoins on it. So there's a lot of coin that is not moving, completely immobile. Is it because people are holding, or is it because those keys are gone? In fact, the largest hoard is Satoshi Nakamoto's coins themselves. They have never moved, and they probably will never move, because if they move, the guy or the girl or the team can probably be de-anonymized. So distinguishing between those 2 events, I think, is a precondition to answering your research question. But if we could answer that question, that would be very, very interesting. I think, so anecdotally, right? I mean, here I'm really talking about, 1 or 2 people that I know. There are some folks who decided to hoard. There are some famous ones like Roger Ver, who then spent a lot of money on his Bitcoin Cash project. There's a couple of people who managed to make fortunes just being early to the party. But what happened a lot is that a lot of those early hobbyists, they really wanted to use that stuff. They wanted money to circulate. So in particular, I know a few people in the Bitcoin mining community in Pittsburgh before it went to ASICs and that super expensive stuff. Those were hobbyists that were building GPU rigs to mine Bitcoin. And the first thing that they would be doing as soon as they were mining 50 Bitcoins was to spend those 50 Bitcoins on a new GPU card, because that was fun. That's what they wanted to do. So I think that a lot of that currency has circulated. What's the breakdown? Was there a transfer of money eventually to those hedge funds? Yes, there was, but when did it happen and what kind of money is it? Is it new entrants that are immediately losing their money, or is it old hats that are unsavvy? I really cannot answer that. It would be fascinating.
Do you think representatives from the SEC read some of these funds?
Yes.
Like, why haven't they done? Because, like, you know how the subprime, like, mortgage from
Yep.
08, that's been, like, research is done to
Yep.
show that that was BS from like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And then after that, only after the financial crisis happened, they started, laying down the hammer on hedge funds. So
Yep.
why haven't they been doing that already?
So they have, but the wheels of justice grind very slowly. That's the thing. Yeah, you're asking me if people read this stuff? Yes, they do. In fact, it's funny because that's the type of paper that you go talk to somebody at the SEC or, oh yeah, you were on that BitMEX paper. That was you who read it? No, oh no, yeah, the whole division read it. So we know that those things are being read. Why don't they do anything? Well, it's very easy for me to say, hey, look at those equations and look at this model. We see things happening. What they need is operational data that show that some fraud has been conducted. There's a gigantic gap. I mean, that's not my remit. My remit is to show, real patterns that occur. They need to have conclusive proof so that they could potentially go to trial. And a judge or a jury could say, beyond reasonable doubt, this was illegal. That's very, very hard to do. And it's good. I mean, it protects us as citizens, right? If, we could be sentenced for criminal activity based on a hunch or based on a fairly comprehensive academic study, I don't think I would want to go out of my house, right? So it takes a little bit of time. It's slower, but no, they're very much aware of that. And the other thing is when you talk to those folks, they've got gigantic divisions, and in the gigantic division, there's 2 or 3 people who really know what they're doing because they're interested in that stuff. Then they have to talk to the other people to evangelize, to actually teach them, to give them the tools, because a lot of folks, even in those places, they're still like, yeah, spot markets are a problem. Like, yeah, okay, that's 5 years ago. You need to look at derivatives now. Yeah, it is. It's slow, but no, it is being read.
Okay, so am I right in understanding that in the derivative contracts, the counterparties are the exchanges themselves?
No, the counterparties are other people on the contract, but the exchange basically needs to be able to back the value of those contracts, right? So when something gets liquidated, they really have to sell, potentially have to sell on the spot exchange to make up.
So they are giving the guarantee to each of the parties in the contract.
Yeah, I mean that the contract will be honored.
I see. Okay.
Right? Because you lose 20 million to me.
Right.
Okay, that's great. I want those 20 million.
Right.
So the exchange has to give me something, right?
Right, exactly. So they're gonna,
Right. And it was leveraged,
Yeah.
right? So that money has to be real at some point.
Right. So to follow up on that, so then, and this also follows up on the first couple of questions on how this is sort of different from the regular financial market
Right.
manipulation. The exchanges in cryptocurrency markets seem to be quite a bit more fragile than the traditional financial exchanges in.
You sir are very, very good with euphemisms. Yes.
So, do you have any evidence or any sort of intuition for whether these big players like hedge funds are actually engaging in trading that is sort of not only betting against the other counterparty for the futures contract necessarily, but against the exchanges, right? So, for example, you've got a lot of one Bitcoin accounts. How do you know those are actually people who have one Bitcoin and not just hedge funds who are creating one Bitcoin accounts?
Well, the honest scientific answer to the last question is I can't with 100% guarantee, but we've done clustering to see, where money was coming from, like 2 or 3 hops up the stream when they're being paid into those inbound wallets.
Yep.
And you can very quickly cluster people when you do that. It's essentially playing chain analysis, but on a small scale, right? We can sure, they could have a completely fresh account, create a new thing and get money directly from a miner. It'd be super complicated to do. They could do that, but so that's why I cannot answer, with 100% certainty that our clustering worked perfectly. But I think it worked reasonably well. As to the earlier question, are some hedge funds betting against exchanges? I can't say that I've seen conclusive evidence of that being the case. I also cannot say that I would be very surprised if this happened, because you're talking about some folks who are trading, tens of billions of dollars, and some of them are a little bit acting like, financial cowboys of sorts. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some of those shenanigans going on. it's a little hard to see. And in particular, so one thing that is dodgy is what's happening with a lot of the exchanges in Asia. So Singapore, Hong Kong, not mainland China. No. The mainland Chinese people know better. They go somewhere else, right, to do this. Some of those exchanges have extremely questionable KYC AML rules. They always find a very fine line. They're not doing anything illegal, but they're like, hey, look at this. This is like a video game. And you look at their webpage, it literally looks like DraftKings, right? No, this is a financial institution, right? And so some of these guys, OKEX has done some pretty sketchy things, including, I'm still on video, I should be careful about what I'm saying. Some of those exchanges have been shown to have extremely weird internal trading patterns that would show pretty conclusively, sure, you can always explain things away, right? That was the answer to the question about the judges. But it really looks like wash trading. That really looks like, things that is basically illegal. So some of those exchanges might also be involved in trying to take down some of the competition. They've got very big, deep pockets. Some pretty prominent exchanges are being under investigation. So the gentleman was the question earlier. The SEC is currently investigating Binance. That is not a small exchange. That's the biggest one. Why? Multiple violations of AML, KYC, and those people have a lot of money, so they can buy themselves some very, very good lawyers also. I wouldn't put it past them of trying to take down some of the competition, but do I see evidence of that? No, scientifically, I cannot say I do. We see weird things. We're like, yeah, this looks really odd, but they're not stupid, right? They're not doing it completely in a completely obvious manner. Right.
I'm sure you saw the news.
Final question.
Okay, Kim Kardashian getting $1.5 million fine. And I was just curious, how is that viewed differently than somebody like Jim Cramer recommending a stock? And why do they delineate that and say this is a crime?
So I didn't read the details of Ms. Kardashian's exploits because I think that was until like yesterday or 2 days ago, and I was busy doing something else. But the way I understand it is that she basically didn't declare that she made money off securities. That's a no, you can't do that. It's basically tax fraud. But I may be off base here. I think she made money from NFTs and then say, oh, well, I just made money online. And no, there's like very specific taxation rules. In fact, last year I traded a little bit of Bitcoin because I had some. I traded a little bit of Ether. I traded a little bit of FX. It's like maybe 10 trades, and we're not talking, I'm a professor, so I don't make millions of dollars. We're talking literally nickels and dimes. That increased my tax return by 10 pages. Literally 10 pages, because every single trade was a potential capital gain event. You have to determine whether it's short-term, whether it's long-term, whether you're trading a security, whether you're trading, a precious metal. Everything fits in a box. You have to find the right box. There are businesses now that are dedicated to helping people do that. So when I'm saying those 10 pages, basically I input stuff in one of those services and they spat out whichever form it is. The thing that reports capital gains. And I was like, geez, that's so many. And stuff is like, yeah, you send 3 Satoshis to that guy because they were looking at the matching on the platform itself. So if I sold, 5 Satoshis, 3 to you, 2 to you, then that's 2 events, right? It gets pretty complicated. And I think she got slapped because she basically thought she was going to get away with it. I really need to read the complaint though, because I'm answering a little bit without knowing what I'm talking about.
Okay, let's thank Nicolas again. Okay, so Patrick is gone for teaching, and I'm just going to wrap this up. And our next week to the room. And next week we will have Professor Morgan Frank in the same place, same room, talk about the future of work and worker skills. And if you haven't and you want to receive updates about all the talk information, you can add your email in the back, and we can add you into our mailing list. Thank you for coming.
Yes.
So I got to introduce myself. Sorry,
Yes.
I'm Simon. I'm a